In this video, we're going to talk about a shortcut that might help you in making this factoring a little easier. So the first thing that we always need to look at is what kind of function do I have? So we can see here our highest degree is 2, so that makes this a quadratic. And this also has a highest degree of 2. So this is also a quadratic. Okay? You see they're very similar in looking, just different variables. That's okay. 3 terms, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. My middle term is a negative, same thing. My end term is a positive, same thing. Okay, so when we go to factor, the first thing we do is we always look for the greatest common factor. So I'm going to ask myself, for both of these, do they have a greatest common factor? The answer here is no, and the same thing here. There is no greatest common factor. So neither one of them have a greatest common factor. But one of them we can do a shortcut with. And the one that we can do the shortcut with is our first one right here. So very, very similar in many ways, but this is the only one that we can do a shortcut with. Okay, this one we cannot, and I'm going to show you what will happen if we were to try the shortcut with that. So why can we do a shortcut with the one on the left and not the one on the right? The reason we can do the shortcut is because this lead coefficient here is 1. Okay? When our coefficient in front of the x squared is a 1, we can do the shortcut. So I'm going to write that down. When the lead coefficient, and that's the coefficient in front of that x squared, is 1, we can do the shortcut. Okay? So, let's go ahead and do the shortcut. So the easy way to do the shortcut is we're going to look at 24. So 24 is positive. So I'm going to just write down all my factors. I'm going to write down my list of possible numbers. So 24 divided by 1 is 24. 24 divided by 2 is 12. 24 divided by 3 is 8. 24 divided by 4 is 6. 5 doesn't work. And then we start repeating, just the other way around. Okay. So just like in the other ways that we factor, like we would do with this one, I'm going to look for what's my center term. My center term here is negative 10. So I have to add these up to equal negative 10. So when I add this, I get 25. When I add this, I get 14. When I add these two, I get 11. When I add these two, I get 10, and then this repeats with a 10. So I'm like, wait a minute, they all became positive, I need a negative. Well, what's the other way to get a positive 24 when we multiply things together? A negative times a negative gives us a positive. So both of these, if both factors are negative, it's going to give us a positive 24, which means when I add my two negative numbers together, all these become negative. So there's my negative 10. It doesn't matter which one I choose. I'm just going to pick this one because it's the first one I see. So now here's the shortcut. Let me back this out a little bit so we can see the whole thing. Okay, so what are my factors of x squared? My factors of x squared are x times x, and what did I choose here? Negative 4 and negative 6. Okay, so I have just factored. That was a quick and easy way, and the only reason it worked was because this was a 1. If I were to try that with this, it is not going to work. And I'm going to show you in just a second. So the first thing I want to do is we're going to check our answer. So you can see in the first one, I put in x squared minus 10x minus 24. This is my other one I'm going to show you in a minute, but I've turned it off. Do you see how that equal sign is not lit up? That means this is not going to graph. So now I'm going to put in my factors, which is x minus 4, x minus 6. Okay? So in my y3, I put in my factors for my y1. So when I go to graph them, they should graph exactly the same. If they didn't graph exactly the same, then that means I made a mistake. So the blue that just graphed was this. And we can see the black that's graphing right over it were my two binomials being multiplied together. If I go to my table, you can see that both y's are exactly the same, which means that I factored this correctly. Okay, so now I'm going to do something wrong. This is going to be wrong. This is not going to work. In fact, I'm going to put here, so this here is going to be wrong. Okay, so here you cannot do the shortcut. And I can't emphasize this enough. Okay, so let's see. If I were to do the shortcut, what did we do before? We multiplied 2 and 15, correct? So 2 times 15 gives us 30. So I'm going to do 30. And then, let's see, I want my factors that add up to negative 11. So I'm just going to, I already know that 6 times 5 is 30. And if I add those up, I'm going to get 11. But this needs to be negative 11 in the center. So that means both of these have to be negative, because negative 6 times negative 5 gives you 30, and that adds to negative 11. So now I'm going to try the shortcut. So if I were going to try the shortcut, if I were to do, I don't know, let's say 2m minus 6, and then I'm going to do m minus 5. Let's see if that works. So I'm going to turn off my first one. I'm going to turn on my second one. I'm going to clear this one. Actually, so I'm going to put in 2x minus 6 and then x minus 5. So now I'm going to see if these two graph the same. So here is my original that's coming in. There's my 2m squared minus 11m plus 15. And then here's my other one that's coming in. You can see it did not graph the same. Okay? And then, so that means this is wrong. And also, if I were to look at my table, these numbers are totally different. Okay? The only thing they have in common are the y's are 0. So this here is wrong. You cannot do the shortcut, okay? You have to do the long way. So the long way, I'll do it the long way, would be 2m squared minus 6m minus 5m plus 15, okay? So what did I do? I had to take these numbers, and that's replacing my negative 11m. Then what do? I have to split them into two separate parts. Common factor here is 2m, so that 2m gets factored out in the front, and then that leaves me 2m squared divided by 2m leaves me with m. Negative 6m divided by 2 gives me negative 3. Here, what am I going to factor out? So I didn't have the opportunity in a previous video to show you this, but because this is negative, just the very first term in this group, I'm going to divide by a negative. So that means I'm going to divide by negative 5. So then that gives me negative 5. And what happens when I divide? Negative 5m divided by negative 5 gives me m. 15 divided by negative 5 gives me negative 3. So we can see right here that m minus 3 and m minus 3 are the same. So that means that factors out of both. And then I have 2m minus 5 is what the other one becomes. So that there is my correct factoring. So let's just take a moment to check. So I'm going to clear this first one because we're not interested in that anymore. I'm going to go down to my other factor that was clearly wrong, and I'm going to put in my new factors, which is x minus 3 and then 2x minus 5. And I'm going to look at the graph, and I will see that they graph exactly the same. So there is my original function, and then my function is going to come right over it in factored form. You can see it traced over it. If I go to my table, you can see that my y's are exactly the same. So be careful with the shortcut. You have to ask yourself, what is the lead coefficient? If the lead coefficient is 1, you can do the shortcut. If the lead coefficient is not 1, you cannot. You have to do it the long way.